We're here today with Professor Cliff Shaw, who is a volcanologist and does all kinds of incredible geology.
Most volcanoes don't erupt in human lifetimes. If you think about what's going on in Iceland, down in the Reykjanes Peninsula, there's been an eruption there for 800 years. So everybody goes, oh, well, there's been an eruption for 800 years, there's not going to be an eruption. And then all of a sudden there's an eruption and everybody's going, oh my God, what are we going to do? So one of the things we try to do is to make understanding the volcano a little easier by looking at its history. Because by looking at the history of the volcano, you can start to make predictions about what it's going to do in the future. And volcano can't talk, so you have to go and quiz the rocks and look at the rocks and find out and read what the rocks are telling you about the history of that volcano. So that's kind of what I do. Switched into thinking about experiments and how do things work, and trying to take apart rocks and understand how they work by doing experiments on the rocks. So heating them up, squeezing them, heating them and squeezing them, and then finding out what do they look like before, what do they look like after, how does the pressure and temperature affect these things, and what can we understand about the origin of the Earth and the evolution of the Earth from these experiments. Because the experiment you time at is an experiment. So inside that metal capsule, we put some glass that we made with a very specific composition. We put a mineral, and we reacted the two under very controlled conditions of pressure and temperature and time. So we know exactly what was going on in there. And we've done this in Colombia. My big research area recently, past 30 years, has been in Germany. And everybody looks at me when I say I'm working on volcanoes in Germany. There are no volcanoes in Germany. Actually, yes, there are. One of the things we figured out about 10 years ago, I guess, was that much of the magma that comes out at the Eiffel at speeds of 30 to 40 kilometers an hour. So if it travels that fast near the surface, if it travels that fast the whole way from the source, the magma can leave its source in the mantle at 10 o'clock and be at the surface at 11 o'clock. So effectively you have no warning.
Wow.
But more recent work we've done shows that the magma doesn't actually make it to the surface all in one go. A batch of magma comes up and it warms up the surrounding rocks, but it freezes in place because it doesn't have the energy to get any higher. But then the next batch that comes up passes through that earlier batch because it's warmed up and makes it easier for the magma to pass through, and it reaches another level, and eventually it's like climbing stairs almost. Eventually the magma gets to the surface, but it goes up quickly and then stalls, and then goes up at 30 kilometers an hour and then stalls, and then so it's a sequential process. So we would have warning. So we just realized that we would have warning. You remember back in 2011, the unpronounceable Icelandic volcano, which I'll pronounce for you. It's called Eyjafjallajökull.
Oh my goodness.
So it erupted with very little warning. Started off with a small cinder cone formation between two glaciers, and then the eruption center switched to right under the Eyjafjallajökull glacier, and the magma rising interacted with the water from melting the ice, and boom, huge explosion, and all the ash ended up drifting over Western Europe. Cost $1 billion in lost business. People were trapped in Europe, no flights were going. Volcanologists, as their scientists, is make sure that the people who are making decisions about aircraft routes and trade and all of these other things are aware that sometimes your aircraft have to fly over geologically active areas, not just volcanoes, there are other geological hazards too. In the Eiffel, there was an eruption 10,900 years ago in the spring that deposited ash as far south as North Africa and as far north as northern Sweden. It was a massive eruption. So if you think of the May 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which is quite famous, you see it on YouTube all the time, it was a big explosion. The eruption of this volcano, which is called Lachersee, was a Mount St. Helens equivalent every hour for about 3 days. So it was massive, left a massive hole in the ground, which is now the Lake Lachersee. Yes. And then dotted around the Lachersee crater are all these smaller volcanoes, and many of them are highly explosive. And yeah, okay, they're not very big, but they are highly explosive, and they're on the flight path in Frankfurt Airport for all flights coming out of North America. So when you fly into Frankfurt am Main Airport, you fly right over the Eiffel. And if one of these things lets go, you could end up flying your jet plane through a column of ash, which doesn't work very well because the engines tend to seize up after the ash melts on the turbines and the plane goes down. So there are good societal reasons for looking at these things. I have 2 students who work for banks, 2 former graduate students. One of them did his master's work on volcanoes in the Eiffel, and he is now the head of their risk assessment unit in the bank, because they have heavy investments in the South Pacific, so where there's lots of volcanoes.
Yeah.
So his job is to look through the literature and understand this language that the bankers don't understand, and explain to them what the geologic risks are. So and I have another student who worked on a similar project, and she works for UNICEF, working with kids in at-risk areas, and many of these areas are in the East African Rift, where there are lots of volcanoes, and so she's still working with volcanic risk, trying to communicate this to the people she's working with, the problems of accessing clean water in remote places in the East African Rift and so on. So she's still, even though she's working mostly with children, mostly for a non-governmental agency, she's still using her earth science background all the time. So every aspect of life is earth science from the point of view of finding resources. So at Galeras, this volcano in Colombia, it's got fumaroles, so like degassing and lots of steam and smelly volcanic gases, but it's also putting out something about 8 to 10 kilograms of gold a year.
Really?
Just in the vapor. So this is an active mineralizing system. So it's high level fluids moving through the rocks, and they're dumping gold. And if we want to find gold in older rocks, we have to understand how the gold deposition works in these very young rocks.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it is. It's so we can take these modern things and we can project them back into time, which is what the economic geologists do. Whereas the volcanologist in me says, well, I want to know what's going to happen in the future. I'm not so interested in applying this stuff to very old rocks, because they're always all messed up and they're not as pretty. But the economic geologists are really, whoa, if we can understand this, then we can see these similar features in these ancient rocks, and we can start to vector in on what might become a mine. So you can be forward looking or past looking, or both.